Okay, well, like I said before, welcome everyone to our year-end close with Dynamics GP webinar today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Caroline Vargas. I am your account manager here at MIG. And then we have Faye Ann Reynolds. She is our consultant here at MIG. She's going to be conducting our presentation. Great. For the audio controls, you can choose your mic or your speakers. You can use, as I said, your computer speakers, or there is an option to dial from your phone. The information is provided at the bottom. Questions. We will have a questions Q&A session. You can submit your questions through the question panel. And they will be responded right away. And as I mentioned at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. Our agenda today, we are going to talk about who we are, MIG, about us, year-end close, year-end checklist, module closing order, how to close subledgers properly, finalizing and troubleshooting your year-end close, and we'll have a live demo and a Q&A session. Okay, so about us, MIG, we are experts in the implementation and support of leading financial and businesses applications for Microsoft. Our solutions are Microsoft Dynamics GP, Microsoft Dynamics SL, and Microsoft Dynamics CRM. We have been in business since 1998, and we assist organizations streamline their business processes and maximize their productivity. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our certifications. We are a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We are recognized by the Microsoft community as a solution, as an ERP premier solutions provider. If you guys are taking this webinar or this presentation, if you'd like to get CP credits, please let us know and we will be happy to help you with that. Great, so we'll start our 2015 GP year-end close. So Faye, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll just leave it to you.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. I'll be going through our various slides for this PowerPoint presentation and answering your questions. Please don't hesitate to type in any questions you may have, because otherwise we don't want anyone to leave here lost and confused. For your year-end checklist, there are certain things that are recommended that you do to make sure there's the absolute most easy, your checklist and your year-end close will run easily. The first thing you want to do is to finalize all of your applicable transactions. This means that for the final period of the year that's being closed, you want to make sure that everything has been done, has been posted. You want to reconcile any submodules to the general ledger, so that if there's been any journal entries posted directly to accounts receivable, accounts payable, etc., you want the GL accounts to match what the subledger balances are. If there's been any problems with posting for entries that didn't complete correctly, you want to take care of this. Any batches that have been stuck in posting, you want to resolve them before you do the year-end close. If you have any batches that are stuck out there that have no names, you want to also resolve and delete those so that they don't cause any issues. You want to print your necessary reports and files. This is done by going into printing your trial balances, your aging reports, your financial statements, printing the reports from within GP, and from FRX and or Management Reporter, if those are the ones that you're using, to make sure that you have necessary balances before the close. And this also gives you the numbers to look back to and double check on after the close to make sure there's been no issues. Next thing you want to do is make a backup. Making a backup is probably the most critical step. You can never have too many backups. At the very, very minimum, I would recommend making a backup before you start any of the closing process, and then after the closing process and before anyone gets back into GP, make a second backup. This way, if there's any problems, we can always go back to where we were before the backup happened, before the close occurred, and take care of any issues and then reclose. I can almost guarantee that if you think you can skip this step, Murphy's Law will come into play and you're going to be kicking yourself. Always make at least that one backup before starting. If you have the space and time, I usually recommend actually doing a backup before every module is closed. This way, if there's a problem, you don't have to go back to the very beginning. You can simply go back to the module where the issue occurred and continue from that step. You can have MIG, your IT department, or your external IT provider run this backup, and it should be stored in a separate location so that you can easily find it. Normally, it would be put into a folder somewhere on your server called year-end close backups, and then if you did it for each module, you would call it like before AR, before AP, before payroll, before FA, before GL, so that you know exactly which one you're doing. Right after your backups have been complete, you will start the closing process. The first thing you should do is always make sure you have enough drive space, hard drive space on your server. Since closing will actually copy your current year tables into the historical tables before the current year tables are deleted, you should have enough space to double your current year tables. So whatever it is, I would take the size of what your size of your company database times 2. And if you don't have that much free space, get some extra hard drive space so that you can run the close without having an error come up because you've run out of room. Okay, there are various year-end myths that have come up over the years about closing for the year. One of them is that you have to wait until all of your adjusting entries have been entered before you can close the general ledger. And this is definitely not true. GP will let you go into the most recently closed year and post to that historical year. After you've posted the history, the GP will do a little minor mini close that will roll your P&L amounts into retained earnings and adjust balance forwards for the balance sheet accounts. You only need to make sure that your last historical year is completely posted. And you want to make sure that all the adjusting entries, for example, that all the adjusting entries for 2014 have been completely posted before you close 2015, because you can only go back one historical year. Another myth is I'm running my close and my general ledger year-end close seems to be stuck. Probably not. Usually what this is, depending upon how much data you have and how fast your server is running, it could take anywhere from a few minutes to over half an hour or more to close. You may think that you're stuck. Just be patient. It will continue closing. If you try to stop it in the middle, your best bet at that point becomes going in, restoring backups, and hoping you haven't damaged tables to the point that you have to delete and rebuild tables from scratch. So do not assume that your GL is stuck. I have actually never seen one get stuck. and I've only been doing this for 15 years. Another myth is that the fixed asset close is easy. All I have to do is change the year on the book, right? No. Actually, for fixed assets, you should close the fixed asset module, and it should be closed in the first period of your new year before you calculate depreciation for that period. So, if you are running depreciation every month, before you run your January 2016 depreciation, you want to make sure that the fixed assets module has been closed for 2015. If you wait and you've been analyzing your depreciation in the module, it may try to catch up for any periods that have been passed before the close, so that if you didn't close fixed assets until March or April, that first close could give you a huge amount of depreciation because it's trying to close 3 months worth of information and give you an entry, which is why we recommend that this is done right there at the beginning of the year with the rest when you close payables, right after you've closed receivables, payables. Go on and close fixed assets. General ledger is the only one that you would really want to wait on. Another myth is that you can close receivables and payables whenever you get around. And while this does not affect the general ledger, there are year-to-date and life-to-date buckets that can be affected when you close receivables and payables. If you're using your summary fields functionality, it is critical that you close in the first period. If you don't, these fields can be corrected by running a detailed smart list report of all the transactions for the current year and then adjusting the summary fields amounts. If you've actually had to enter something in receivables and payables, it's best to go on and save it into a batch until you've closed it, so that your year-to-date, life-to-date buckets won't be affected. All right, next, module closing order. There's a specific order that you should close your modules. If you do not have use one of these modules, you can just skip right over it. Don't worry about it. First module that should be closed is inventory. Then you will close receivables and payables. These should all be closed in the first week of the new year, after all the various period end processes have been run, such as aging reports, etc. And since we're closing for a calendar year, you would select to close both the calendar and the fiscal year for both receivables and payables. After you've closed payables, you would close fixed assets. Fixed assets is never closed before payables. Payables has to be closed first. Any books that are running on the calendar year basis should be closed before calculating your depreciation for the first period of the new calendar year, which is usually January. Payroll is closed on a calendar year basis before the first pay run of the new calendar year. If your first pay run for the new calendar year is like January 2nd, you want to make sure you do the close at that point in time, because you want to make sure it's taken care of before that first pay run is calculated. If you and when we get into more for the closing the submodules, we'll go into a little bit more detail about closing the payroll. The last module that will be closed is General Ledger. General Ledger will perform a hard close in which the P&L accounts are going to be rolled into retained earnings accounts. If you've been using interfund or a segment to classify funds and you want to roll into divisional retained earnings accounts, you would have, because you're using analytical accounting, You would have to check in the Analytical Accounting Setup options window to allow this. And then you would make sure that your GL setup shows that you want to use Divisional Retained Earnings account, and that each division with a P&L account has a Retained Earnings account set up. I'm not going to go into much detail for Analytical Accounting because that's one of those things that not too many are using. If you do run Analytical Accounting, Project Accounting, Grant Management, these types of things are included in our year-end guide, close guide that we'll be sending to you as a PDF file, and you can contact us directly to answer any questions before that happens. Next, closing our subledgers. Always important. If you're doing inventory and you're running inventory, before you close it, you first want to complete any of your monthly processes, your cycle counts, take your physical inventories, so be actually sitting down, counting how many is there, comparing them to what the computer says is there, making the adjustments so that inventory is correct. You would post all the non-recurring inventory batches, run any reports, review your stock status reports, and then run your inventory year-end closing procedures. Before you do all of this, if you have any new year transactions, they would have been saved to batches. And then once the inventory year-end close has been completed, at that point you would post the new year's inventory batches. All right. The next subledger is receivables management. You would want to make sure that you complete the monthly processes, includes posting all of your non-recurring receivable batches, running your aging reports, etc. You would review your aging reports. You would run the receivables year-end closing process, and you would save, until the closing process is complete, you would save any new receivables transactions into batches to be posted after the close has taken place. Payables pretty much is the same way. You would first, when you're running your payables, you would complete your monthly in the same way that you would have completed them for the receivables module. You would run any 1099s for tagged vendors if necessary. And then you would run the payables year-end closing procedure. There's 2 closes required. If for some reason you're not on a calendar year, you would run the calendar year closing at the beginning of January. This closes the 1099, zeroes out the buckets for the new year. And then if you're on a fiscal year, you would run the one for the year-end process at the close of your fiscal year. If you're normally running on a calendar year, you would actually select both, and it would close both the calendar and fiscal year at the same time. The 1099 close is run for the calendar year because it will zero out any of your summary buckets for the calendar year, and this should be done before you post any payables transactions. They should be saved in a batch if necessary until after this has been done. Your 1099s can then be printed after the closing procedure. They don't have to be printed beforehand. So you would run through the process, run the 1099, tagging them, setting up the file for them, and then later you can go on and run the 1099s once you actually have received your 1099 forms to run. All right, closing fixed assets. Again, first you close out your payables module. Second, you will double check that all of your transactions have been posted. These are for additions, retirements, etc. You'll double check that your final depreciation routine and the related general ledger interface processes are complete, and then you would run the fixed asset year-end closing procedure. You want to make sure that this year-end close procedure has been run before the first depreciation is run in the new year, which would be January of 2016. All right, payroll. Payroll is one that is extremely important to get done correctly, and there's a few more steps involved in it than in many of the other modules. Your year-end processes for payroll are always done on December 31st. If you don't run them on December 31st, you would run them on the very first day that you come back after that. Since most businesses are closed on January 1, you would run them on January 2 as soon as you come in. You would not run any payroll until after the payroll for the prior year has been closed. You remember that the dates that are on the paycheck determines whether or not it's a 2015 or 2016 payroll. So after you would run it on the 12/31, you want to confirm the status of any new updates from Microsoft. And those statuses, the release dates, the 2015 year-end update is due to come out mid-November of 2015. And then in mid-December of 2015, the first tax update, round one of the tax update will come out. Those would both be put into place before you close payroll. The round 2 tax update does not come out until mid-January of 2016, and that would be installed at that point in time. The round 1 tax update is for taxes only. If there's any code changes, they would be in the round 2. The 2015 is one of the purposes of that update is to actually make sure you match the current W-2 forms, cover any new changes that the IRS has made to what the W-2 forms should look like, what they should include, and that's why you would run those. After you process your final payroll, for all your payroll and all the various period and quarter procedures, you would then build your year-end wage file, and this holds all the information needed to produce your W-2s and 1099-Rs. And then you would review and edit any W-2s and 1099-Rs as needed. All right, after everything's been reviewed and you know your W-2s and 1099-Rs are correct, you would print them. You would apply any new Microsoft Dynamics tax table updates, which can be found using the customer source download, and the new tax tables are generally going to be put on after the close. So you'll put in the year-end update from mid-December before you close. That first tax round for 2016 would be put on as soon as you close. And then a month later, when the one comes out, round 2 comes out in mid-January, it would be put on at that point as well. So the only one that has to be put on before you close is the year-end update. Right? Your new calendar year, after everything, all the tax tables have been run, the new calendar year can now be processed so that you can run your first payroll of 2016. Okay, when it comes time to close your general ledger is always your final module to close. It does not have to close immediately. You can finalize your adjustments and post any of your single-use batches. You would want to print out a detailed trial balance and FRX or Management Reporter financials, making sure that your ending balances are and what things look like. You want to double check your posting to history setting, making sure that it's going to allow posting to the most recent closed fiscal year. You also want to double check that the maintain history boxes have all been marked. Then you would run the year-end closing process. Make sure you click the close button only once. If you click it more than once, it can end up doing 2 closes, and that will screw everything up, so that we have to end up restoring to backup and redo it. So make sure when you click it once and take your hand away from the mouse. You would then, after you've closed it, you want to issue financials, any financials that have been delayed past that first accounting period, so that if you haven't closed your general ledger until February, March, April, May, you could go on and print all the financials that have been delayed. All right. When you close your general ledger, you go into the year-end close, the very first button window you're going to see is that year-end closing. It has your retained earnings account that has been preset. It will show what the starting journal entry number will be for the new year. Usually, most companies allow this to just keep growing. You could restart it every year, but it ends up getting very confusing because you could end up with several journal entry 123s based upon the various years. Normally I would recommend just leave it alone and let it keep growing. You can mark to have it remove any unused segments. Normally this is left blank. We do not mark it because we don't really want to delete any unused anything. We want the numbers to still be there. They may not have been used yet. You may be planning on using them. They may have been used in the past. It's easier to just leave it alone. It'll show you what the last closing date was. And you would click that Close Your button. That's the button that you click one time only. When you click this button, you may get a message that says you must run the consolidate transactions and transfer detail to history utility to close the year. You would just click OK. Occasionally you'll get a message that says there's batches that are unposted. Again, you would just click OK and let it close anyway. Because if there's any recurring batches or anything, it's going to give you this type of a message. All right, some ancillary items to look at when you're doing your year-end close. All right, first, before we close the general ledger, you want to set up in SmartList a simple account SmartList. You want to review the posting type settings. This way it'll make sure that all of your balance sheet accounts are marked as being balance sheet. All of your P&L accounts are marked as being P&L. This way they will close correctly without us having to go in after the fact and fix things. This is very, very important, especially if you've added any new accounts during the year, because this is the type of thing that, quite frankly, gets mixed up the most. And most of the problems that have happened because of closing general ledger is because the G&L was not closed correctly, because you have a balance sheet account that ended up zeroing out to retained earnings because it was accidentally marked as being P&L, or you'll have a P&L account that has a balance brought forward because it was accidentally marked as being a balance sheet. If you have a test company, you can close your test database first if you want, and that way you can make sure everything closes correctly. You want to make sure that your fiscal period setup is correct by going to Tools, Setup, Company Fiscal Periods. You want to make sure all the 2015 module boxes are closed, and make sure you have a new calendar year for 2016 module postings. All right, troubleshooting for your year-end. The major troubleshooting for year-end is in payables would be editing amounts since the last close. Most of the other troubleshooting relates to the general ledger, being able to reprint year-end close reports. That somehow your history transactions have gotten removed. You want to post to a historical year. You need to clear out your unit accounts. You need to fix a P&L account that has a balance brought forward. You need to fix a balance sheet account that is zeroed out. There's a divisional retained earnings error, or you get a message that says another user is closing. All right, for editing the amount since the last close, this would happen if the amounts for the vendors since the last close were incorrect. And it could be because transactions from the prior or from your next year have been posted either before or after the closing date. To resolve this, we can edit the amount since the last close by going into the summary vendor card. We can enter the vendor, click the button yearly, then in the summary window, select amount since last close in the summary view and edit the values. I mean, if the amounts are wrong, we can correct them. It's just labor intensive. This is one of the reasons that we ask to please double check these types of balances before you do the close. All right, if you could switch to the next screen now. The screen should be the reprint year-end close reports. All right. Sometimes, say your year-end close reports failed to print. Well, if they failed to print, there's really no way of reprinting them, but you can go to a cross-reference report by going to something like Reports, Financial, Cross-Reference, and reprint the report for the year-end closing journal entry. I always recommend for any of these year-end close reports that you print them. I like to print them to the screen and to a report, to a file, either a PDF file or a delimited file of some sort. And this way, when it prints to the screen, you know that it's finished printing, and you have a file that you can go into and save on your computer, and it does not involve possibly thousands of pages. It'll save trees and time. Transaction history has gotten removed. This often happens after your year-end close. All of your historical transactions have disappeared. This usually has happened because you didn't check those historical retained history boxes. You would want to restore from a backup to fix this. You would mark the maintain history under the GL setup window, and then you would reclose your year. You can run the backup from GP if it's been installed on a terminal server, and you would definitely want to check about this transaction history before anyone has entered or posted any new transactions, because if you restore from backup, anything new that they've put in is going to be lost. It would have to be re-entered. Posting to a historical year. If you're missing the transaction or adjustment needs to be made to post to a historical year, you would go in and check to allow posting to history in the General Ledger Setup window. You would post a transaction, and at the same time you post that first transaction, a second transaction will automatically be posted to the beginning of the balance of the current year. Then after you've posted the historical year, I recommend going in and uncheck Allow Posting to the History in that GL setup. And this way someone doesn't accidentally post to a year that's been closed simply because they're used to typing in 2015. All right, clearing unit accounts. If we need to zero out the balances for unit accounts, and this will apply to GP 2010 and older versions only. There's now a checkbox option for GP 2013 and forward that will take care of this. So the way it would happen is that the unit accounts were not cleared by the year-end process. We would complete the year-end close. We would make a backup. We would run clear unit account script against the company database, reconcile all the closed and open years in GL, and the script that would have been run would be to delete GL 20,000 from GL 00100 and GL 20,000, and it would show your account index, the various sources, the BBFs. We would be running that script. This, as I said, only affects GP 2010 and older versions. So if you've upgraded from GP 2010, this is not something you'll need to worry about, which is always nice when they've taken care of it. Fixing a P&L account, balances remain for P&L because the account posting type was set up incorrectly. It can be fixed. This is labor intensive. We have to charge for it, but we can fix it. You would get everyone out of GP. You would prepare a backup. If there's multi-currency registered, you go to the multi-currency setup and unmark to maintain history for GL accounts. You'd run your N1 script in SQL, unmark maintain history for accounts and transactions, and mark to allow posting to history in the GL setup. You would enter a journal entry to correct the posting. Make sure that the right date for the closed is using the right date for the closed year. If the account has a credit balance, beginning balance, you would credit retained earnings, debit the P&L account, reversing it if there was a debit balance. You would then post the transaction, and the transaction would hit not only the current year, would hit only the current year. You can reverse changes in step 3. You would run script N2 and reverse step 2 if there's multi-currency registered. And it's going in, the script N1 and N2 is adjusting the multi-currencies. If you don't use multi-currency, it's something else. Fixing a balance sheet account, again, this is caused because a posting type was set up wrong. Again, we can fix it. It's labor intensive. We have to charge. Log everyone out. You would do the same type of things if it's for running multi-currency, marking things to allow posting or not posting, running scripts N1 and N2, make a journal entry to correct the posting so that if the balance sheet account should have a credit beginning balance, you would credit that balance sheet account and debit retained earnings. If it was to have a debit balance, you would end up making your journal entry so that it would have a debit to the balance sheet account and a credit to retained earnings. So much easier to actually run it and check it in that smart list, so we won't have to do that. The divisional retained earnings error. This may happen if you may get a message that the retained earnings account was not found during your year-end close. You would set up a retained earnings account for each department that has a profit and loss account. If the divisional retained earnings accounts are not used, you would unmark close to divisional account segments under this GL setup window. As you can see, it's there under the bottom where it says retained earnings, the check mark for the close to divisional, and you would unmark that if there are no divisional. Another very popular error you may get is that another user is closing. This could be a user is stuck in Great Plains. Someone didn't get out of Great Plains and you forgot to check to make sure everyone was out. Something could be posting. The year cannot be closed. There is an automated solution for stuck records that can be used, or you can simply go into your SQL Management Studio and run the script that says delete SY00800 where batch number equals whatever the batch's ID is. If this is one of those batches with no names, contact us because there's a different way we have to delete that batch since it doesn't have a name, wouldn't have a name. All right, best practices. First thing, you want to make sure that no one is logged into GP during the year-end close process. You would check the user activity window to ensure that you are the only person who has been logged in, and it is best for you to be logged in as SA or Dine SA. That way it makes sure that you have all the security rights you need. Next best practice is to always make sure you have 2 valid backups of all your companies and the Dynamics database. Perform one before doing the closing procedures and the second one after. I would recommend saving these in a folder that has been created for each year for the backups so that you would have something that would be called something like Drive G, backups, year-end close, /2015 YE, / and have one folder called before close, and then you'd have a second folder afterwards called after close. Again, if you have time and space, doing one before each module, running a backup is always a good idea as well. Verify the posting types for all of your accounts. This is running our smart list to make sure all of our G&L accounts are correctly marked as P&L or balance sheet. Read the documentation and follow the order of the modules to close. The PDF file that we send you has them in the correct order. Read the documentation, make sure you're doing it correctly. Call us if you have any problems. Call us ahead of time so that we can arrange to have somebody available to help you. We can either just simply be there if you need us or actually be there and be walking you through it to answer your questions so that there's no issues that come up afterwards. And you want to make sure you save or print your year-end close reports. Since some of these reports are hundreds or thousands of pages long, especially the ones related to receivables and payables, I would recommend saving this file or printing the file to a PDF and just have it print to the screen so that you can tell when it's finished. This way, you're not waiting forever for the printer to spit out all that paper that you end up never using. Okay. Rather than the live demo, I'm actually just going to show you where what the screens look like for each of the year-end close. All of the year-end close for every module is found under the routines. You will go to maintenance, go into the tools, maintenance, routines, and then the module. If you're using the desktop that shows for each of the various modules, you would go under routines, and it's called year-end close. And under inventory, you will see that it's marked there. You can choose to tell it to remove in inventory discontinued items, lot attributes, sold things, to update standard cost, and you would click process to run the close. The only thing you might update would be the standard cost. Often we don't worry about closing discontinued items or anything because you want to keep the history. Under receivables, when it goes into time to do the receivables, you would mark that the year that you're going to close is for all, both the fiscal and calendar. You would mark to make sure it prints the report, and you would click process. If you do not mark to print the report won't get printed. Payables, again, you would mark that you're closing all, fiscal and calendar, print the report, and click close year. If you're doing the GL and analytical accounting close, you can go in and under the GL and analytical accounting, you would go into the general ledger. That screen is actually not showing the correct screen, but you would go under routines, and it would be the general ledger with the retained earnings, and we would click that we're going to close the retained earnings and let it go. And it will show you you always tell it to print the report, because otherwise the report would be lost. The GL report is actually just going to show as a huge journal entry, as it takes everything out of the P&Ls and puts them into retained earnings. The payroll close, you go in and you create the year-end wage file and process it. That closes the payroll so that you can then run the new payroll, and you can print your W-2s at a later time and 1099s at a later time. And that's pretty much it. All right. We have any questions?
Yes. Thank you so much, Faye. So let's wait. Looks like we do have some questions here. Let's see. Okay, so what's the tagging for 1099? That's one of the questions we have.
All right, 1099s need to be printed before January 31st. Therefore, they have to be printed for any of your 1099 vendors that you've paid more than $600 to for the year. You can, once they're marked, you can actually go on, you can close the year and you can print the 1099s after the year has been technically closed, because quite frankly, sometimes you're closing it right there at the beginning and you may not have the 1099 forms for whatever reason. You can normally get the 1099s, W-2 forms can be ordered from Microsoft, from the IRS, or you can actually order them from Office Max, Office Depot. You can get them from Walmart. Almost anyone that sells office supplies, you can get them.
Okay.
If you have, remember under the rules, if you have a certain numbers, depending upon what the IRS has stated, number of 1099s or payroll employees, you may have to file electronically to the IRS, in addition to giving the paper to the vendors and customers, vendors and employees.
Okay, great. Thank you, Faye. So it looks like we have other questions here. What is the most critical step of the year-end close process?
Making a backup.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Making a backup. You can never, ever have too many backups.
Great.
I am a very, very strong believer in Murphy and his law, and if you try to ignore him, he will reach out and smack you a good one.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then one other question. What is the module closing order?
All right, you would close it as inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, payroll, general ledger.
Okay. And another question here. Where do we find the year-end closing windows?
Right, those windows are always under routines for every module. Every module year-end closing window is under routines.
Great. Okay, we can wait a few more seconds and see if there's any other questions. Looks like that is it for now. Okay, great. I think we can move to the next slide. Okay, so I want to just touch base briefly on MIG support. MIG support plans are reliable and consistent support service programs for businesses that are running Microsoft Dynamics. We have benefits with our support plans, and some of those are support with Microsoft Dynamics products, support with any related third-party add-on that you guys are using, and we have fixed rate plans as well.
Caroline, we have two more questions. One is, can we go over the year-end revaluation process for multi-currency entities? Marilyn, we cannot do that now, but we are going to send it the slides and the recorded webinar. And if you have any questions, you should submit it at info@mig.com. And another question from Natasha, what should you do if your accounts receivable subledger hasn't been closed in several years?
I would just go ahead and close it. If you really, I mean, the only thing that's going to be affected by it will be the buckets, the year-end buckets. And I would just go ahead and close it at the end of this year. If you haven't really gone in and looked at what the year buckets are in the past, it's not going to make a big difference. Just go ahead and close it when you can. Close it with the new year, and that way you know it'll be taken care of. If you want it to have the correct closing dates, if you've already closed the general ledger, I mean, when you close it the first time, you'll see what the closing date is for the fiscal and calendar year, and you can look at it that way. But it's not like it's an urgent, life is going to end as you know it if you haven't closed them. I mean, the ones that are really almost more important are the 1099s, because those are the ones that you have to send out each year. But receivables, people send you 1099s for receivables, but you don't really send out a receivable for that. It's more of a functional, keeping track of which customers pay you, how much they purchased this year, how much they purchased last year, how much they've purchased life to date, and keeping things in the correct buckets. So I mean, it could be possible to go in and change all those buckets, but if it's been a few years, I just go on and close it and not worry about it, quite frankly.
Okay.
There's no need making things more difficult than you absolutely have to.
Sure. Okay, last we'll go over MIG training. So MIG can be, we can use, do very customized training to your needs, and some of our training benefits are various options of training. They are available with our support plans, and we have group discounts. If you guys have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@mig.com. At the end of this presentation, we'll have a survey. If you guys don't mind going over it, this is designed so we can improve our webinars. So please take a few moments to provide us with some feedback. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. We look forward to speaking with you very soon.